I don't know if we're gonna wait for this fourth panelist to join us before we go live, or we are live already, so never mind. But, but we might just get started and pass the floor to you, Anna, and move to Natalie, and then if she comes, that's great.
Okay, so are we getting started?
Yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right, folks, thank you for joining us. We're just opening up the webinar here, giving you a second to connect. All right, so bonjour et bienvenue tout le monde on behalf of all of us behind the scenes here at Force-Space. Welcome everyone in person and over Zoom to Listening Beyond. This is a launch event of a student podcast project which is focused on activist oral histories. We are coming to you live from Concordia University's Force-Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Force-Space, we work to connect people to the initiatives, research projects, classroom activities, and dialogues happening across Concordia University via daily live events. So to that end, it's our pleasure to welcome students from the course community and local activism in the School of Community and Public Affairs into the space. And of course, any audience members who are joining us in the space or over Zoom, welcome as well. I will pass it over to your prof, Anna Schaftel, in just a minute, but before doing so, just letting you know that we are live streaming to YouTube, and I'll put that link in the chat. So that means that the recording is already available as soon as this event is over. If you ever want to share it across your channels, feel free to do so. And if you would like to jump into the conversation today, if you're over Zoom, feel free to raise a virtual hand and we'll go ahead and unmute you. Otherwise, the Q&A and chat are activated. All right, on that note, it's over to you, Anna. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anna, you already said it, but I will, of course, start by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands, and the Untitled Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And of course, considering what we're going to talk about today, I think acknowledging the land and the responsibilities that come with that knowledge seems like a very apt opening for a panel about studying activism from the bottom up and through oral histories. So I'm going to not talk too much today. I'm going to instead, give space to some of our wonderful students to talk about what this project has been like, but I'm going to give some context first. Today's panel is a sort of launch and celebration and reflection of the student podcast that we're launching, called Listening Beyond, a podcast that shares the oral histories of diverse activists, advocates, and changemakers. And the context for this is it comes out of a course that I've been teaching this winter in the School of Community and Public Affairs called SCPA 352, Community and Local Activism. And this course is part of our major in Community, Public Affairs, and Policy Studies. And for those who might not know, SCPA, we're a small interdisciplinary school, and what brings us together is an interest in the intersection between policy and community, between theory and practice. So we have students who want to make a positive change in the world in sort of various ways at various levels. And so this class on activism feeds into a larger curriculum that looks at how we affect change. So through policy, through practice, through community engagement, et cetera. And so we started off the course this winter thinking about how we study activism. And as I was reflecting on the podcast, I went back to some of the stuff that we read at the beginning of the semester that I'm sure the students have already forgotten. But I thought particularly about a chapter I asked the students to read by Aziz Chowdhury from his book, Learning Activism, in which he's very critical of how activism and social movements have been studied thus far, and particularly critical of how overly abstract and sort of overly simplistic theories of social change tend to be, because they're very far removed from actors on the ground. And he says, and I quote, the problem is terminological proliferation as a symptom of withering dialogue with activists. Later, he says, theories about movements might learn from theorizing and knowledge from movements. And then a week later, we read Bell Hook's seminal essay, Theory as Liberatory Practice, in which she similarly posits that theory and that the work that we do in universities should be a way of making sense of lived experience, of taking the deeply intimate and personal experiences of various injustices and finding the language and structures to better understand them. So, using these kinds of texts as a jumping off point, classroom discussions, et cetera, we got to this project, this class project that was our major focus for the past 3 months, which is an oral history of activists. And I want to be clear before I hand things over to the students, just how little I did on this whole thing. So I was the prof for the course, and I gave some directions to the students, but for the most part, the result is something that the students went and ran with and made their own. And so what I did at the beginning of the semester is I asked students to form groups of 2 to 3 people, and we talked about how the focus of the project would be to conduct a life history interview with an activist or an advocate of their choosing. We worked on how to do that together, on the ethics, on what oral history is, how you ask questions, how you respect people's boundaries, how you search for meaning and push deeper, et cetera. And I said that the primary purpose of these interviews, in addition to an essay that they would write, would be that we would collectively work as a class on a final public outcome, on some way of sharing these stories with the world in a way that seemed meaningful. And so listening beyond this podcast is what came out of it. And so I want to be clear that as the professor, I never said our plan is that we're going to make a podcast. I just said we're going to make something. And it was through a lot of class discussion, deliberation, et cetera, that we decided as a group on a podcast. And then, as the students in the room will attest to, you guys then did all the work, by which I mean you came up with the title, you came up with the description, with the format, with the platform that we'd hosted on, the cover art, the music, the social media presence, the public outreach and press releases, et cetera. The students did all of this. What I did was give some guidance and send a lot of emails with a lot of exclamation points to sort of cheer people on and, encourage us to get it done. But this is really a student-led project in the most wonderful sense of the term. And I also want to acknowledge that the Student Association at SCPA also really got on board. And so the SCPA Student Association provided funding to help make it happen. They helped us plan this launch. And so it's been really amazing for me as a prof to watch students really take ownership over the project and to make it a thing that I think became more than what you were doing for a grade, but a really dynamic contribution to public discourse. And I will also acknowledge, as I think you will all attest to, that doing this kind of project for coursework is 10 times more work than the sort of standard coursework that you do. It's a lot more work than writing an exam or a sort of quick research paper, because you weren't just interviewing, but also listening, editing, figuring out how to put all the pieces together, et cetera. And so it's kind of a remarkable accomplishment in a 3-credit class. So the result is a podcast in which each episode focuses on the life and work of one person, on their own reflections about what it means to work for social change or social justice, and on what we can learn from that. And this has accompanied a semester of reading diverse texts on activism, listening to guest speakers in class, lots of lively classroom discussions. But I think what's been so special about this project is the idea of learning about activism through just spending a lot of time really focused on listening to one person's story. So to celebrate the launch of the podcast, which you can find on most podcasting platforms, it's on Anchor, Apple, Spotify, et cetera. And also, again, thanks to the initiative of our students and no work on my part, the Concordia radio station, CJLO, is going to be airing an episode every week at 5 p.m. on Tuesdays. It's also in the listening booths here in the space. So it's everywhere now, and we're taking a moment to reflect on what we've learned. And so we have a few students from the class who volunteered to share their thoughts today, and a few more in the audience who we can call upon. with some time for questions and discussion at the end. But the big question is, what is it like learning about activism through these kinds of life stories? What were the challenges of it? What possibilities did it open, et cetera? So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over. I think Natalie, we agreed you would go first, and go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Natalie the Mesurier. First of all, good afternoon. I would like to thank you all for coming, and everybody on Zoom or whatever meetings this is. Hi. This is really exciting and really nerve-wracking. I'm currently sweating, but I've never made a podcast, so this is all very new to me, and it's a little scary to know my voice will be on all these platforms for anybody to hear. But I hope you enjoy. Everyone worked really hard on all of this and did a really good job, and everyone's interviews were super interesting. We can all learn a whole lot about these from these interviewees and their stories. So I hope you enjoy listening. I would also like to thank Professor Scheffel, or Scheftel. When I first saw the syllabus, I honestly kind of panicked because it was a lot of work. But you've been by our sides the entire time, checking in on us, giving us feedback, helping us brainstorm, and making sure we had every resource and all the time we needed. So thank you so much for your presence. You're also a very good teacher. You made the class dynamic really engaging, and also you brought this concept of activism to life by having so many activists actually come in and talk to us about their work. So I applaud you for that. Thank you as well to everyone in this class. You guys were so very nice and welcoming. You all worked so hard individually on your own podcasts and your own tasks to make this podcast really come to life. From the formatting to the outreach, and you were all so open to like new ideas and perspectives in class, which made the dynamic in class just so much more enjoyable. So like props to like everyone in class. A special thank you to Margot Buchanan and Emily Cunyal, who I'm partnered with for this oral history project. I didn't know either of you going into this project, but it was an honor to work with you both. We worked hard, and I'm quite proud of us and what we put out. Editing was tiresome and tedious and a lengthy goddamn process, but we made it through and it is done. So there's that. Thank you most of all to the interviewees. Thank you for letting us into your space and being gracious enough to tell us your stories. Thank you for opening up to us. I know sometimes it was a bit complicated organizing schedules, but I hope it didn't deter you from more student-led conversations and interviews, because you all have some great wisdom to impart on us, and we thank you for doing so. And to David Chapman, our interviewee, it was an honor to meet you and hear your story. After our conversation, I felt significantly less accomplished. You are an amazing person and human, and you have a great laugh. And I hope to God you continue your work with the homeless, because it is truly exceptional. You have inspired me and have made me aware of things I had never thought about before. So thank you. It's a little strange to be here today because I kind of picked this class on a whim. I'm not a student of the School of Community and Public Affairs. I know this was a shock when I said it last class, but yeah, I'm in my third year majoring in Western society and culture, which kind of revolves around going through the Western canon and kind of discussing, and it's kind of like a giant book club, to be honest. We discuss history and art and science and literature and politics and music and philosophy, everything from Voltaire to Darwin to Foucault to Rembrandt to the Bible to Dante. It kind of goes around. And along the way, I picked up a minor in women's studies, so these concepts of intersectionality and feminism applied to different minorities. I've taken a lot of theology classes, art history classes, a creative writing class, but this class was different. To be honest, I couldn't tell you why I picked this class. There were some technical reasons. It was on a list of classes to choose for my minor. it fit in my schedule. There was still space left, and it got me to 4 classes for the winter semester. And that's all I needed, really. I wish I'd felt some kind of calling towards it, but to be honest, it was just kind of there. But I'm really glad I did take this class. It was so different from what I'm used to. Just kind of the use of oral history interviews is not something I'm used to. As a source of information, I've learned to be a little doubtful. I've actually taught to be a little doubtful of the oral tradition, but I'm learning to unlearn that because there's so much information you can learn from them. And for some communities, that's their only way of passing down knowledge. However, the problem is with the oral tradition is with fact-checking. Humans are not perfect recall machines, and any eyewitness testimonials can attest to the fallibility of human memory. And the problem is with personal interviews, it's hard to fact-check information. You just have to take it on the person's word and hope they don't confuse dates, names, or even places. It's an incredible experience, though, to get to research a topic this way, going directly to the source material, not looking at a book and having to interpret it, but directly speaking to your source information. If you have any questions, they can answer. If you need a clarification, they can provide it. You're also in full control of the interview in the sense that they're there to answer your questions. You can lead the interview one way or another. It's a lot of responsibility at times and pressure, but it is amazing not having to search so many different avenues for the same information. And it's exciting knowing that your work in the podcast could be someone's source material someday. When I first read the name of this class, Community and Local Activism, the only word that stuck out was activism. So I was taking an activism class. I was going to be taught how to picket in the streets and tie myself to buildings and organize a riot. At least that's what I thought. Those were the images that came to mind when someone said activism. For the longest time, I called this my SPCA class, like the animal shelter, which was a stupid jumbling of letters on my part, but it was kind of fitting when you think. You were rioting for the dogs. But my assumption about this class weren't at all what the class had entailed, neither what activism is about. Activism is a strange concept to me. Even now, after talking about it for 4 months, I still can't 100% wrap my mind around what activism is. And as I think back on my life and my own contribution to activism, it's hard to define what moments would be considered activism. If we define activism as kind of like a vigorous campaigning to bring about political and social change, I've only maybe taken part in 2 larger activist movements, and my contribution was minute and not even noticeable. I by no means consider myself an activist in that sense. However, if we define activism as its broader definition, campaigning for the little guy, sure, I've been an activist. We're all activists. I've been to protests. I've been to 2 protests in my life, the Black Lives Matter protest and the environmental protest. We sang a Sesame Street song as we walked around town in 6th grade, I think against bullying, but my memory is a little foggy. In high school, I volunteered on the board of directors of the Magasins Monde, which sold equitable products and advocated for sustainable development and responsible consumption. I was a part of the Girl Guides growing up, and every year we would clean up the lake in town, and one year we painted a yellow fish with the saying, "Rainwater only," above every sewer grate around town to remind people not to pollute the water systems. And I'm sure I'm missing some. But in those occasions, I felt like we were doing something good. There was a sense of togetherness, but I honestly didn't think much of it at the time. Someone needed help. They said it was a good cause, and it seemed right. Before this class, I didn't understand that people's natural instinct when they saw a need or saw something wrong was not to be appalled and do something, but to just turn their heads. I'm glad I took this class in the end, because it reminded me with everything wrong in the world, there are still people fighting tooth and nail to make society better. And as a little bit of a pessimist, that gives me hope. I'm going to be honest with myself and with all of you. I don't know if I personally have the dedication and the guts to do what the amazing activists we learned about all throughout this semester have done and continue to do. But I'm sure I will try to do even a fraction. And I will remember, as David Chapman said, to make sure that the inertia from which I pull my small bits of activism to be from a place of love for the people and not resentment for a larger social structure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Daniel, go ahead.
Amazing talk. It is a little bit intimidating to go after you after this. Yeah, so I'm Daniel Pungaru. I am part of the School of Community and Public Affairs, and this was an amazing class. That's what I want to begin with. I'd like to start by thanking Nagusset for giving us some of her precious time. She, as you'll have the chance to see, she has, to hear rather, she has a lot of projects that she takes care of, and it was amazing to just catch a glimpse of this person. I'd like to thank my teammates, Valerie. Thank you a lot for your wonderful writing and for your hard work. Terrence also didn't have the chance to complete the course, but was there at the beginning and really helped kickstart this project. Thank you to Anna Chaptel for integrating such a hands-on project to her course, and for also being a great resource and a teacher throughout the semester, despite what I imagine is a very busy schedule. And thank you to everyone as well for all the hard work you put into the podcast. I was really amazed by the final product as well. And you're all incredibly curious and talented people. And each of you has a great vision for what the world could be. And I'm really grateful to be able to share classes and moments with you. So this was not an easy project. As you said, I didn't expect it to be that much work, but it wasn't homework in the traditional sense, not at all. It felt like we were actually working. And in a sense we did, because now we have a final product in front of us. We're on Spotify. I didn't think I'd say that one day. And it's really great because this is not going to be a paper that's going to sit on a hard drive and be forgotten. And I think the best that came out of this is that we can actually use what we learned. We can go out there tomorrow and use it. These are very useful skills, and it's much more than I can say about many of the classes I've had, despite how important it is to learn. This has been incredibly hands-on. Hands-on, I think we've said it countless times, but the editing of the audio was, and producing the episode was hours and hours of listening and editing and fighting against the software, sometimes not doing what you think it should do. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I knew it wasn't gonna be quick, that's for sure. I didn't expect it to be like, oh yeah, tomorrow I'm gonna have a podcast ready. But I didn't think I'd stop counting the hours after, I don't know how many weeks of working on it and working on the details and everything like that. And spending so much time learning about and listening to someone, their thoughts and discourse, it really starts to resonate with you in a certain sense. And especially when their work is tackling injustices, you kind of start feeling their frustrations. But not just that, you can also feel their energy. The power within them to keep on fighting after hitting countless dead ends, being told no, or that the problems they are trying to solve are not important. Someone that is facing so many hurdles has incredible perseverance and force. And as Nagu best said it, she looks around the room, and if no one steps up, she does it. And she keeps on doing it. It's incredible how many things she works on, how many issues she's trying to tackle. And she says it's not part of her job description. She's the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal. But yet, when you look at all of the things she has a hand in, you realize she does so much more for the community. And you realize that this is someone who is dedicating their life to the struggles of Indigenous people, to elevating them. And she's lived countless traumas and continues to be witness to many more. So this is not so much choice as it is a matter of survival for her and Indigenous people. And those struggles seem to be never ending. Each person that walks in the door with their own sets of grievances and hurts, bringing to light a new failure of our governance. And what's frustrating is that these people are invisible to the most powerful of our societies. They are invisible to institutions, which have the greatest means of change, but choose to be apathetic to the suffering that they sustain. I find that it is a lack of humanity so profound in its unimagination of the world that we could live in. And I find it extremely cruel that we're not doing more as a society to change the things that are happening. Perhaps it's simply easier to be hateful and dehumanizing to Indigenous people than it is to admit that the world we live in is inherently flawed. But regardless, we do have the possibility to change things. And it is why we need people like Naguset. Each of us also needs to keep our eyes and our ears open. We need to act and to speak up when we see injustices, and we need to do our best to break our inner biases. But most importantly, I think that we should give people who best understand these issues the means to change things. Thank you.
Okay, last. I'm more nervous than the both of you, I think. Yes, thank you everybody for being here. I really wish I could see all your faces. It seems like we've done this project together and we've become more than a class, knowing that this is going to exist online forever, as you said, Daniel. So it's really nice to see everybody like this, front to or face to face, and yeah, it feels like we're just having a conversation. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. In reflecting on this experience. I do have my notes on my phone, so I apologize, but I'm gonna try to keep myself on track. First, yeah, if we talk about the skills, everything that we gained from this experience, I wanna talk about being a part-time student and having difficulty engaging, I guess, with students and forming relationships, working a lot, and then balancing the course load as well. And I do feel like through this class is the first time that I really do feel like I've formed relationships and friendships, and I have to shout out my teammate in the audience, Amaran, and Malik and Amaran pushed me to speak today. It's really been really special working with students in this way and having them see you, and I feel like we all did really see each other for what we care about, our skills. And yeah, I'm really, really grateful for that. And then also seeing all of everybody else's skills outside of just academics through this whole process. Yes. So when we talk about editing and things like that, yeah, that's definitely the most difficult part of it all. Listening back for hours and hours, and I still feel like we could probably do another edit now and maybe another one and another one. That was really difficult, and we had such a great interview, as I'm sure everybody did, but we didn't want to cut any of it. So listening back, how much it was touching for all of us to listen to the whole thing as it was the full way through, going back and editing and trying to still maintain that same feeling in the edited down version, for me was the most difficult. Oh, I forgot I still have my mask on. Thank you, back there. Good looking out. Yes, so that was definitely the most difficult. is wanting to get that story out the same way it affected me the first time listening back to the raw interview. So our interviewee was Mr. Alex Adrian, who I'm going to try to talk about a little bit after because I almost get emotional thinking about the interview. It was so special, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity, Dr. Sheftel, for giving it to us, and also for the way that you ran the course so diplomatically and let us really make decisions. At times it was overwhelming, like, can you just decide for us? Like, we don't have time for this. But looking back, it was really nice. And even with the post-production part of it all, finding our own skills and interest in using those, like in outreach or in advertising or in social media, and being able to take it that much further and use those skills and develop them through this process as well. Someone that works in community, outreach is really important to me, so seeing this as one of the things that I could do in the post-production and get better at and do it at this level to produce a whole podcast and then have an event like this and do the outreach for that and have something successful come out of it, like CJLO agreeing to support us and air it on air was really special. So these are some of the things that that really stuck out to me as key takeaways from this project outside of the interview itself. So what I learned from oral history is the amount of knowledge and connections that can be taken from one interview, as everyone kind of spoke on a little bit today. Listening to Mr. Adrian speak was very impactful. He's got a lot of wisdom, and just the way he speaks, yeah, I hope you all listen to every interview, and I'm really excited about ours because I see myself in Mr. Adrian as someone coming up in the community world, and just the things that he talked about, his work with youth and his upbringing, even coming from a strong family background, and having like those cultural roots that really informed the work that he does today and help him to be able to exist in the world of activism. So. I hope to be like him one day, and I know that I'll take this experience as in addition to what I learned from the interview and what we learned together, asking questions together, feeding off of each other's questions, and then talking about it afterwards. Me and everyone sat on the phone for hours. I think like even maybe 4 or 5 hours one night until like 1 a.m., just like going through all the clips that we wanted to make. But there was so much discussion because we would find ourselves stopping and telling each other why we thought this clip was so important, and we really dissected each thing that he said, and that goes back to your question, Dr. Sheftel, of like what you can learn from oral history. And it is just thinking more critically and thinking more deeply about what you've been told, direct experience from those activists. And I'm really grateful to Malik for giving us the opportunity to meet him. It was his connection that was made that allowed us to interview Mr. Adrian. And yeah, he's someone that I'm going to be looking up to for a long time, and I hope to possibly mentor under. So I'll put that out there, Mr. Adrian. Hope to talk to you. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to just keep going. And talking about Mr. Adrian, so I want to say, yeah, a huge thank you again. And what was really interesting, I was slightly late for the interview, and then you learn a lot of things that you need to perfect the next time. But I missed the beginning of the interview where he was speaking about celebrating his birthday party the night before, and then coming and doing the interview with us, and it immediately created this trust, I think, within the group, and this vulnerability and this honesty from the beginning, and that allowed us to have the conversation that we did with him, which is again why it was so special. So doing an oral history interview, I realized having that trust and vulnerability with your interviewee really can make the world of a difference of the information that you get from them, and the way that the answers even will unfold. Like there's things that he told us that we would have never knew how to ask or frame a question for, but it just is how he opened up. And he also thanked us for allowing him to kind of reflect on his own life and his activism work and his advocacy work. He says he doesn't consider himself an activist, but I think for someone like him who's been doing this work for 50 years, I guess it's difficult to stop and think and reflect on all the things that you're doing because you're just constantly doing them. So he appreciated the opportunity to think back, and then he realized at the young age of 14 is really when he began his activism, but his upbringing, it was inside of him forever, and just the way that he approaches life. And the lesson that we learned from him of just how to think more deeply about our interactions with each other was what really stood out. And actually, I'm going to read a quote to really give you the context of some of the insightful information that he gave us. So I don't have the direct quote, but what he was leaning towards was people working with youth, how they need to be held to a higher code of ethics, because unfortunately, some just don't like the job, they don't like the kids, and it shows. And that honesty, like there was countless moments that he was that honest with us, and then in the same breath would explain how he can understand other points of views and doesn't fault anybody for the way that they are, but just to challenge us to think more deeply and to have debates, have uncomfortable conversations. He said, if it's not uncomfortable, then we're just having a chat. And I love that quote. You know, that's going to stick in my head forever. It's like, yeah, like it needs to be uncomfortable. We need to have debate. So there's just so many parts of that I will take in my work, in my personal life, in my conversations, my daily interactions. I think that we all will. So we're really, really, really grateful for that. Yeah, I do. I feel privileged to have interviewed him, to have been a part of this experience. And yeah, I just want to thank you all. I think like we're awesome, and listening to some of the interviews so far, not all of them, has been really rewarding. And to know, like you said, Daniel and Natalie, that we can do this now, and we can take this experience and maybe feel more comfortable talking to activists in this light and going beyond research just from one conversation, how impactful and how beneficial that really is. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is this working? Yeah. Thank you so much to all three of you. Those have been, anyway, really beautiful reflections, and I was glad I was wearing a mask so I could hide my blushing. We do have time for some questions. If, from what I understand, folks I have the Zoom open, so I can see if folks want to ask questions or raise their hands in the chat, or if anyone in the audience, even those of you who are in the class, you have your classmates in the hot seat, so feel free. Anybody? I have like plenty of my own if people are feeling shy. Or I was going to say, because a bunch of you from the class are here, even if you didn't volunteer to speak, if this has elicited any reflections, please feel free to add on to anything your classmates have said. Eleanor, go ahead. Oh, yeah, I think we need to bring her a microphone.
Sure. My question is there anything that you think you learned from the interview that you wouldn't have learned if you had just like read this in an article?
Do you want?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you want to interact or.
There we go.
I have two microphones. That's a good question. I don't know so much. I'm not going to dwell too much into the details, but I think it's not so much about the information I learned, but about caring for that information in a certain way. About internalizing, about thinking about it properly, right? It's not just another news source that's passing by in front of me. No, definitely, like it's just that connection you have with the issues that Nagusset specifically was talking about.
I mean, I guess I already like had an inkling to this, but I guess it was more like, it was more grounded when Chapman had said it, that like you need kind of, I don't know if I should say this, but he had mentioned how social science students make the worst candidates for employment, and how that was kind of, it was shocking to me, because he mentioned how you need kind of a melding of the book smart and the street smart. We always like, you can't only be book smart. And like for me, my entire like education is books. And there's no kind of street in there. There's no real life application. And without real life application, and without going, and he mentioned the importance of going, of even like the higher ups, the CEOs of like companies, lawyers, whatever, going into the real world and actually making like visible contributions to actually understand what it is like to be like working with the homeless, to actually be with these homeless people, and then to actually make the laws that will actually impact and actually do something. Because or else you're talking out of your ass, to be honest. You don't know what you're talking about without actually being implicated in it. Anyway, that was what was kind of like, I guess, made real. Thanks. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll add, sorry. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think definitely like not knowing like that activists have so much plethora of knowledge inside of them, and maybe not knowing what to ask them and what's appropriate to ask them, and like having to go through that process too during the question making. That there's most definitely information about like policies and implementation that could happen at like a board level, or even further at like a government level, that maybe I wouldn't have had the knowledge to frame myself, but Mr. Adrian then went to, and then that incited information that we did initially want to pull from him, but then it was just like elaborated so much that we wouldn't have been able to, I think, like predict. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to kind of build on that question, actually. Sam, in your talk you said, and I wrote this down, there were things that he told us that we'd never know how to ask or frame a question for. And I kind of wanted to throw that out to all three of you, actually. Like, you know, I asked you guys this in the last class as well, right? Like, what unexpected stuff happened? Because in my experience doing oral history interviews, often the thing that you think is going to be interesting is not actually what's interesting, and then you hear a whole bunch of stuff that's not what you expect. So what are those things that you guys heard that you wouldn't have known to ask for?
Sure, I can start. It's on the front of my brain. I would say sometimes in talking about like race issues, especially as they refer to like Black youth in our educational system, which is what the primary focus of our interview was, it can be touching, or it can come across as biased to ask certain questions a certain way. So I think we shied away, or I can speak for myself, shied away from asking certain questions that would present my opinion, or what I thought to be true. And I knowing that Mr. Adrian had so much information, I wanted to make sure the question was framed in a way that it just provided any information he had for us. So what came from that, I don't remember the questions that we asked him, but what came from it is him working in the educational like sector, you know, as a principal, as an educator, as a mentor, as a coach, then retiring and now being the president of the Quebec Board of Black Educators. You know, he has all this experience of things that he's seen in the different roles that he's been, and what he shed light on was that the history that has been taken from our kids, and because we're not taught it accurately, or we're not taught it at all, he framed in a very interesting way and went back to how important, like, he's a student of history is. And I want to say this correctly. Yeah, he spoke of how it's a racism is a human rights issue, and you know, he doesn't like to bring up racism often when he speaks, because it creates this wall for people that aren't able to see beyond that scary word, and don't want to take on that kind of stigma of what it means to have those feelings, or to have you know, racist tendencies within you just because of the way that society has taught us as children. So the way that he framed it was just so intelligent, and really made me think about my own bias and understanding of the work and knowledge that I know. So, you know, as a people, we're storytellers, and the way that he explained facts and then also the story behind things, it just there was so much context that it didn't leave you wanting to question or kind of be taken aback by what he was saying. It just made you think about everything, that you know, and then how you could learn more. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that was great.
What kind of surprised me the most, which was, I mean, I had questions about it, but I wasn't never going to ask it about it because it's kind of a taboo topic, was his perspectives on religion. It's because every time you ask religion, you kind of get in kind of like a mucky territory of, like, some people are very, I don't know, pro-religion, sometimes they're very anti, sometimes they're just kind of, and it's, so I was never going to ask about it, but then when we asked him, well, can you talk to us about your upbringing? he mentioned how his father was a Baptist minister and how his religiosity growing up, how much that influenced him. And he went on to talk about how he was a bereavement counselor and how that experience kind of really shaped him. And I think that was like, I don't know, your experience, your like vision on death and your vision on religion, I think are really like, those are like big topics that I did not expect us to ever talk about, and were like really surprising. But I'm really glad we talked about them because they really helped me understand him as a person and really helped like frame the entire interview.
Thank you.
We did talk a little bit about it in class, but sometimes the words you use are very important. And our class is called Community and Local Activism, but for like we said, that word activism has a lot of negative connotations, and I can understand why. For her, it's more about advocacy. And it was a surprise because it was the first question we asked, do you consider yourself an activist? So it wasn't the best way to start the interview, let's put it that way. That was a little bit of a surprise. And yeah, I guess what was very interesting was, I think to me, was how long she could go on for about all the issues that Indigenous people are facing, all the invisible issues. I mean, it's so much more visible now with the video of Joyce Chiquan, with all the tombs that are finally being discovered, even though we had commissions and countless interviews and people were telling us all about this. It was just, she kept on going, and she kept on telling us how, it seems like until it's visible, people don't care. Or, like there's written things, there's, oral history in a certain way, but interviews, like people, testimonies, and it's never out there until something big happens, something that's newsworthy happens. And the fact that it kept on going and going and going, I'm just like, it feels like we're, as a society, we're not doing anything. I mean, I'm not saying we're not. There is a lot of progress that is done, but there's a lot more to be done as well.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments, either from the Zoom or from the audience? Anybody? Go ahead, Margot. Yeah, no, that's it. You need to use the mic. It's okay.
Oh yeah, thanks. I mean, I was supposed to speak, but I'm pretty sure my baby's gonna freak out as soon as I start talking. I honestly, I was very excited to see that someone was interviewing Nakuset, because I actually have the privilege of working closely with both David and Nakuset. And that's actually why I went back to school and got into this program, because there was such an obvious discrepancy between our academia and the people on the ground. Sorry, here's my baby.
Oh, he's so cute.
Yeah. Well, yeah, anyways, I haven't been to class because of this little man, but honestly, just to add to what Natalie was saying, was just how candid David was in our interview. And honestly, there's a lot that we cut out, unfortunately, just because it was so long. But I just wanted to mention that when you get in the field, you actually can get in the field and have these people in your life. And they're incredible, and you think that they're kind of so far away in a lot of ways, but they're actually on the ground, both of them. And so just to mention, I was actually going to make a speech, but just to mention now, how to get involved, you can actually just follow the Native Women's Shelter. Well, actually follow Iskway Project on Instagram, follow Resilience Montreal, because these are the kind of people that actually, if for instance, if a homeless Indigenous person dies in Montreal, anywhere, their funeral is automatically held by Resilience in the Native Women's Shelter, because this is the kind of people that David and Nakuset are. And just things like following their Instagrams, that you can support them in those situations and support our organization, because it's very hard. And then also, by the way, I'm the volunteer coordinator and the head of the logistics team at Resilience. So that's why I'm talking from like in this way. But yeah, there's like these people are so incredible. The reason why David's not here right now is because there was someone that showed up in a wheelchair today at Resilience, and what he needed to do was find them a place to stay tonight. And that was the priority for him after work, even with 4 children, even with his life going on, like that was what he's doing right now, or else he would be here. And yeah, so like, I think we need more people like you guys that are on the ground with us, even as volunteers. Like I was a volunteer at Resilience before I was staff, and now I'm the only one that's been there since 2019, like consistently. So I've gotten to work with David and Akasek closely, and I've heard actually pretty much everything that they said in our interviews from them personally, just from being involved, because it's so important for people to just show up and dedicate themselves to causes. And like, I was so excited that everybody in this class seems so enthusiastic about getting involved in community, and also the importance of community and having grassroots work. But yeah, there's an invitation, like even the community council, like the community table of Peter McGill, like this area, they were asking like, oh, well, how can we make a relationship with Concordia students? And I was like, I know a good program of people that are involved with that. And like, yeah, there's ways that we can, just by getting involved in organizations, you can build the gaps between the two and kind of help create a larger infrastructure for a social change. And yeah, anyways, it was very lovely being in all of your classes this semester. Unfortunately, I was only there for like 7 out of the 12 weeks or 8 weeks or so, but it was really lovely hearing everybody, and it made me like more excited about just the change that should come in Montreal in the next few years. Because of people like the activists you interview, but also yourselves. So I invite you to stay in the field, get involved, but also like stay in the field. And yeah, there's a lot of things about working in organizations that are really hard, but it takes people with a good heart. And like Natalie was saying, like if you're coming from a place of love, then you will make a difference. And it doesn't matter how small it is, whether it's like serving coffee to the homeless in the morning, or, you know, watching children at the Native Women Shelter. Like there's so many ways to actually make a tangible difference. And like when you actually see the impacts of your work on the ground in front of your eyes, then it changes your soul, and then it keeps you motivated too. So anyways, all to say, I hope you guys all get involved with the field. And yeah, anyways, thank you so much.
Thank you, Margot. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Lacey? I don't know where Mike is. Can someone? Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I guess this is a little bit of like a reflection on my own experience and then a question. So one of the things that I really had to think about while I was interviewing was just how like exploitative oral history possibly could be. My partner and I are both settlers who is interviewing an Indigenous elder, and so really making sure that like she's so used to people interviewing her and then putting her words out of context, using them for purposes that weren't intended, and then it just totally like continues that exploitative cycle. And so it was something that I had to think about, was like, just like, how are we taking her words, making sure we're not twisting them because we interpret them differently because of our experiences in colonial systems, and then what impact that could have on her and all of the work that she's been doing if we really take something out of context. And so that was conversations that we had with her, and making sure that she has okayed everything and understands, like make sure that the perspective that we're bringing is appropriate. So yeah, I guess that's just like the biggest thing that I think about reflecting back on this process, is making sure that this individual's words, like their story is really being told. Like we're just there as kind of an assistant, giving them a platform to talk about their stories. So I guess just as a question, like, how did you guys deal with, like I know you interviewed Indigenous folks and Black folks, and so like, how did you make sure that you were not exploitative and you really like, I guess, how did you capture the actual story that they had, is my question.
It's a great and super difficult question. Who's up for it?
I can tackle it. Or I can start. Yeah, I think like we really just let Mr. Adrian talk. Like we really just let him tell his stories, and we didn't ask certain questions if like we weren't like we have to ask number 7 now. Like it wasn't like that. It just was we allowed for him to take the conversation wherever it went, and he did tell us, he's like, I'm sorry if I'm all over the place because he read the questions beforehand, so he was like answering multiple questions. When we were asking him one question, and that made it very difficult for us in the editing process. But it was super worth it because he did like lead the interview. He just told his story, and our questions just piggybacked off of what he was saying. So I think that that's a way that maybe that we achieved that. But yeah, not easy, not easy.
I guess, our questions were, I wouldn't say vague, but they didn't dive into too much detail. And so it was more of a way to just let her talk. And then in the editing process, we tried to do as little editing as possible. It was a concern for me. I even went to Professor Sheftel about it, but I was taking a lot of filler words out. And, we were 2 white people interviewing a very important Indigenous person. So I was even wondering, should I just leave it as is entirely, or is it justified to, try to make it flow a little bit better for the podcast? So there was thought going into it, but I think like in the end, it's about leaving it as, I don't know how to say, the word's not coming, but like as intact as possible. Just let the person tell their story. I think that was our way of doing it.
I mean, David's white, so I mean, like we were 2 white people interviewing another white person, so it wasn't the same dynamic, I guess, but still, we didn't want to take his words out of context. So the questions were very vague. Vague. I mean, they're just like, tell us about your life, and just kind of had him go through his life. And then the editing, we cut, if a lot of some laughing, some like those are the kind of trims we did. And then if he repeated himself in one at the beginning and at the bottom, we picked whichever one was better, whichever one gave more details or was a little rambly, we cut. But like those were kind of the cuts, so along the same lines, but it was a different dynamic for us.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just made me think, yeah, for us, definitely we ended up doing the opposite almost. Like our first edit down, there was like places I wanted to move this information over here because it made more sense after this question, and then this and this, but it didn't seem like it was flowing the natural way that I spoke about earlier that was so important. So actually with help from Amirin, there's like cuts I wanted to take out of like just a breath or something that could have been trimmed probably, but interrupted the flow of what was being said. So with Amirin's suggestion, she's like, actually, I think I kind of like that. So then we were able to feed off of each other why we thought it was important to take out, and then why we thought it was important, why somebody else thought it was important to keep in. And then thinking, okay, actually, I think you're right, and choosing to go that route. So that was difficult with us in editing, but essentially we just ended up leaving it as much as we could, and then popping in voiceover questions to give context. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. If I can give myself the liberty in the last couple minutes of being your prof for like one more minute. Lacey, it's a good question, and it's one that the field of oral history has been grappling with for decades now, of what does it mean? You record people's stories because you think they're important, and how do you share them in a way that doesn't appropriate them, that doesn't exploit them, et cetera. And the only thing I'll say is, obviously this was built into the conversations we had in class, right? Like, how do you ask these open-ended questions? How do you have a respectful relationship with the person, like through the consent form, but also through the sort of larger contact you've had with each other, and my 1,000 reminders to send them a thank you note and send them a copy of the recording and whatever. And, there's not a clear answer to the question, but I will, you guys all made me blush earlier, and I will say that I've taught oral history for many years, and I've never had a class who got it like this before, in terms of immediately understanding what the stakes are in that way, and like how important it is to do justice to people's stories, to convey them in a way that's fair, that speaks to who they are. A lot of you talked to me about interviewing people who are really reticent, who'd been interviewed before, who'd felt sort of burned, and how much you guys want to sort of get it right and not, burn them again. And so, there's never clear answers to those questions, but I think that sensitivity was there throughout when I talked to you all. And I think that's really impressive because it's something that takes a really long time to develop. I think I will end there. For those of you who are here in person or anyone online who can get downtown very quickly, we're going to retire to the SCPA basement for some refreshments, some much well-earned, especially among our panelists who've been just so wonderful and thoughtful. So thank you so much for joining us, those of you on Zoom, and of course, people who are here in person. And I will pass it over to Anna for the final word.
Thank you. Can we get a round of applause for everybody?
I've mastered the clap.
Well, I just wanted to congratulate you all. From all of us at Fourspace, we do produce a podcast. We know how much work it is. We have 4 people working on one podcast episode at any one time, and it's like 1 hour of, 1 minute equals an hour of kind of editing and so on. So congratulations to you all for the work that you put into this. And by the sounds of it, you had an amazing class experience. And what did I want to say about that? I wanted to say that I was so pleased when Anna walked in here, your prof, to suggest that you have this moment of coming together and kind of tying it all together and having a reflective moment. So I know you just want to maybe celebrate, go out and party, but thank you so much also for coming into the space and having this conversation with us. All right, folks on Zoom, thanks for joining us. We're going to close up now and wish you a great evening. And until next time, take good care. Ciao.
We did it. Thanks, Dr. Christel. Thanks for the opportunity.